Hello everyone, this is Maz. If you're hearing this message, it means you're not part of the Voices of War subscriber community and will only hear the first half of the episode. If that's enough, then I'm thrilled. However, if you're looking to dive deeper into the complexities of war, please consider subscribing to our private feed by using the link at the top of the show notes. By doing so, you'll gain access to all of our episodes, the ability to ask follow-up questions, and will become part of an exclusive community that makes this show possible. I hope you'll make the decision to join us today.
GPT is not just a cultural phenomenon. That new generation of LLM, large language model, is also a technical breakthrough. And it's not all just hype. The AI researchers were telling me they never thought they would see these sorts of things happen in their lifetime. I think it's very easy for people to begin to think that there is some kind of sentience surely lurking somewhere in that model, peering back at you. And there really is not. Like, there really isn't yet. Probably the most important power dynamic of all is the relationship between AI and governments and governance. So around the rules that we set for it, how it should be developed, how it should be used, how it should behave. It will be our fault if these things, start causing harm, start making millions of paper clips and killing everyone that gets in the way.
My guest today is Carl Miller. Carl is the Research Director of the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media at Demos, a UK-based think tank. He's also the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Death of the Gods, The New Global Power Grab, published in 2018, which delves into the seismic shifts in power dynamics brought about by the digital age. Carl also presents programs for the BBC's flagship technology show Click, hosts insightful conversations on the popular Intelligence Squared podcast, and has written for Wired, New Scientist, The Sunday Times, The Telegraph, and The Guardian. This is Carl's second appearance on the show. Last time was on episode 51, where we discussed information warfare, cyber attacks, and weaponization of social media, with a particular focus on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Today, Carl joins me to explore the ethical, social, and political implications of the ongoing boom in artificial intelligence, and how it's reshaping the very fabric of our world. Carl, welcome back to the Voices of War.
Maz, thanks so much for having me back. In 100 episodes, what a milestone for you and all your lucky listeners.
Yeah, and thank you for being episode 100. So 51 and then, nearly doubled it again into 100. So might have to be 150 as well. Might have to have you back. So just before we get to the exciting topic of AI, there might be some listeners who might not have come across your work previously. So maybe you can give us a little bit about your background, both as an author and researcher, and tell us a little bit about the work you've been involved in, and also, perhaps most importantly, what you've been up to of late.
Sure. So I'm a think tanker by background, really, and in Demos, which is a kind of tradition associated with the centre-left in the UK, it's kind of enduringly interested in powerful citizens and how power works and how to make politics more porous and accountable to the people whose lives it shapes. And that's where I joined as a kind of young researcher many years ago now, and kind of fairly quickly into that career kind of realised how important the digital world was going to be, both as a kind of landscape for public policy making, but also as an amazing new opportunity to actually research people. I know all of that sounds unbelievably obvious now, but back in 2012, it was 2011 to 2010 even, I think, it was kind of even a little bit less so. So me and a colleague founded CASM, the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media there. And the rest is history, as they say, really. So kind of CASM began to grow. We began to really focus on research methods as well. Began to build technology to actually research social media, and that became CASM Technology, which is a kind of standalone tech organization that I'm one of the founders of. And a few years after that, we'd be doing lots of analysis and lots of measurements, very quantitative ways of trying to understand the digital world. It's quite necessary often to do that just because the digital environments are massive, I became more interested in kind of also understanding human stories. So I wrote a book about power. That was very driven, really, much less by numbers and much more by humans. And since then, I've kind of had one foot in both worlds. So still do lots of kind of more formal, data-driven kind of projects measuring the digital world, but then also spend a lot of my time making podcasts and writing articles and doing more journalistic work and kind of trying to weave both of those two things together. Largely investigating, I think, kind of the mysteries that the digital age creates, really. That's what I'm fascinated by. So that might be kind of influence operations and disinformation and many things that I know we spoke about last time. It might be actually just I'm constantly interested in the idea of power, actually, and how our lives are shaped and who does that shaping and how and why. And with that in mind, I've just come back from a kind of similar journey trying to understand how power's shifting in the age of AI, and that's going to be a podcast, Intelligence Squared, in less than a month. It's going to come out now. Oh,
right. Okay, great. Well, I'll subsequently put the link to that once it's out onto this episode as well, because I think that would be fantastic. I think before we started, you mentioned it was going to be 6 episodes, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a narrative series. So it's I'm your trusty kind of guide, and I kind of take you on a journey, kind of beginning with very narrow questions to do with power. So that's to do with power over the tech itself, what the tech actually is itself, where it's come from, what it can do, and then we kind of expand the lens out subsequently. So we look at the workforce, we look at society, we look at how power is changing within culture, within geopolitics, relationships between global north and south, and then expanding even further, actually answer that question that I never, I mean, it is scarcely credible to even think that we're seriously considering, but really questions around humanity and whether, we are going to remain in the driving seat of our own destiny as a civilization, as a species.
I mean, these are real risks, and for some it might be, they might seem rather esoteric, but I think more and more people are starting to really take this very, very seriously, not least because we've, I think, globally witnessed the power of this so-called AI, especially post ChatGPT coming out. I think that's kind of been at least in my view, the kind of cultural catalyst to where this might go and how quickly it's developing. But maybe we can firstly start about this idea of power. I'd like to hear how you define power through your lens, but also what that means in a digital domain. So what is digital power, and who has it, or what is the cost of others not having it, right? Given the almost ubiquitous nature of technology and the digital media.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, so power is both a very important idea, but also quite a slippery one. And as kind of authors have always turned to it at moments of kind of great revolutionary change, I think rightly and understandably to basically try and ask the kind of deepest and most important questions about what that change actually is and what it's doing. But in doing so, of course, they've always come with slightly different ideas of what power is and where it sits. Like Marx would say that power is control over the commanding heights of the economy and of capital. Whereas someone like Foucault was much more interested in kind of peering into the hidden influences of language and the operations of power there. Go to Machiavelli, and its power is simply politics, and holding kind of political office is power, or the only power really worth having. So they've kind of all got different ideas. And of course, even defining power is itself an act of power.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I kind of wanted to ask that question, because I think the definition matters, and it also dictates the terms under which we actually discuss it. So yeah,
it is.
Absolutely.
Definitions do matter, and being clear on what power is extremely important. For me, power is simply the ability to shape the world and the lives within it.
Okay.
And that can take kind of a vast array, of course, of different forms. And it doesn't make sense to me to kind of really rule out or eliminate the different forms that power can take. So it can be everything from very coercive forms of power, of force and of threat, all the way through to kind of economic power, so incentives and inducements, money, wealth. Through to probably the power that you see abroad in the world most often, but is often kind of the hardest to actually see, and that's the power of kind of persuasion and of ideas. And power ranges across all of those things, but ultimately, I always see it as the ability for you to reach into my life, me into yours, and for us to kind of and all of us really to kind of shape the world that we live in. And of course that what that is and who has it is, I contend, really kind of changing radically right now, and that it's kind of worth, just like Foucault and Marx and all these others did, sitting in their own moments of great change. It's really worth us looking at it again now, as it really feels like our own society is being reshaped, as you say, in this kind of early months of the kind of post-GPT age.
Yeah, and I really like that definition, because it really kind of nests well with how I view power. And it's if person A has power over person B if they can shape their behavior. And when we're talking about AI, this is where it becomes really, really important, because who then, to come back to that kind of question that I originally asked, and who owns, I guess, the AI, or who holds the levers of power when we're talking about AI?
Well, what a great question. And that is literally what those 6 whole episodes are trying to unentangle. I mean, to kind of shortcut some of that journey, it's obviously clear that power doesn't exist in linear or unidirectional ways anymore. And one of the things I really came back really struck by was how anyone kind of warning about the risks and the concentrations and kind of hidden forms of oppression would also then in the same breath talk about the amazing new liberatory opportunities, and vice versa. And it seemed like two things I think seem clear. One is that right now, the way that especially large language models work, and these generative models, which is what obviously everyone is talking about and thinking about, GPT and all the others, they benefit from scale in a very important way. So the actual underlying approaches to developing these models haven't really changed much in the last few decades. Like the actual thinking about how machine learning works, how artificial intelligence actually should be built, has been made remarkably stable. What has changed is the levels of data and compute power which has been put into training these models. And really, when that data kind of increased, it kind of unleashed, well, what one foundational model developer described to me as kind of it's like looking inside the mind of an alien. Right. He said it's like, we're in a kind of alchemical stage of really understanding what those models can do, but it kind of took off in an exponential way, the performance, which really no one expected. So
that's the scary part.
It's scary, it's scary, but and in more ways than one, really, because I think what that firstly means is that, look, lots of people will build foundational models, lots of people will have their own LLMs, I'm sure, but it's likely that a small number of extremely large companies will continue to break the frontiers, and they will, at the moment, they're exclusively positioned in Silicon Valley, which has always been the place in the world that's been best able to accumulate and marshal huge amounts of money, huge amounts of compute power, huge amounts of data, and all the talent. That's an old story, and AI is just a new chapter in that. But on the other hand, so that's one direction of power, the data and the money and the control is still flowing into a small number of people, small number of founders, one place in the world, and maybe that'll continue. But on the other hand, I think what's also true is 2 other things. One, these tools are much more general than other iterations of machine learning. So whereas in previous kind of generations, you've got a model or some kind of application which has been trained for a really specific purpose, like it plays chess or it predicts a certain thing. And that obviously that training and that use case is set by the engineering monoculture that builds these things, and has largely then obviously reflected the concerns or interests of that particular community. But with GPT and these other models, they're far more general, because they've been stuffed with basically the whole of human culture at this point. They can do things, and they can be put to uses that actually the people that built them had no idea about, or couldn't even imagine, and that we couldn't imagine. So I remember speaking to one of the chapters is I speak to Jibu, who's a kind of one of the kind of visionaries, I suppose, of India's use of AI. And he was taking me through all these use cases that really I just couldn't imagine. Like they're using these models to translate loads of difficult, impenetrable government documents about access to agrarian subsidies and translate that into spoken things for subsistence farmers. And you're like, that's amazing. And as long as the models remain general in that way, and as long as they remain freely accessible, then we're going to see both at the same time. We're both going to see them being put to uses which are genuinely kind of liberating and empowering people that actually don't have much power and haven't really been part of other tech revolutions up to this point. But then also, I could also see a world where that's happening at the same time as actually these super centralized models remain really centralized.
Okay, so you mentioned there, if I understand correctly, the kind of first iteration is the kind of narrow AI. So that's kind of they're very specific, like the chess game, or even something like Siri, which is rather limited in its application. It's it's got a very clear left and right, and it can't
and those
create
are the previous generations.
It can't generate knowledge or can't generate ideas, which I think is the leap of ChatGPT or the LLMs that we're talking about now, where they can actually create knowledge that humanity perhaps it can combine concepts into new ideas and knowledge, but it's not. Would we call that a general artificial intelligence? Is that what that's now reached? Is that the point?
Well, so that's a very good question, and there's obviously there's lots of debate around this, the idea of AGIs or artificial general intelligence. Yes. I think, and the engineers prefer to actually talk about strong AI, which is a kind of slightly different concept, but along the same lines. Do you have something which actually is general? And I think the answer is no, not yet. These models aren't able to. I mean, the one example given, they can't. They might be able to drive a car, they might be able to talk to you, but they can't do all the things a human being can do, or even approximately. But we're moving in that direction. I think the kind of one of the very surprising GPT is not just a cultural phenomenon. Like that new generation of LLM, large language model, is also a technical breakthrough. Is it? And it's not. So it's not all just hype. Like the AI researchers were telling me they never thought they would see these sorts of things happen in their lifetime. And I think it moving closer to becoming more general is one of those surprising directions of travel. That you can ask it to talk to you like a pirate that's lost its keys and it will give you a good go, or you can ask it to write code, it will give it a good go. It's kind of like and that means that it will just connect into all the millions and millions of different ideas and use cases that people have around the world that the developers themselves could scarcely have imagined, will not have been able to imagine. And that has serious liberatory potential, because you can have tools that it doesn't matter that a small community in Silicon Valley can't necessarily have imagined what the thing is supposed to do. What's important is that it can connect into the imaginations of millions of other people as well, at the same time,
and create value for them. But I guess the risk is the fact that even the AI engineers were surprised by the result, by the product, and also if I understand correctly, the difference between ChatGPT 2, 3, 3.5, 4 is kind of exponential. It's not linear. It's the computing power is absolutely enormously different. So we can expect ChatGPT 5, to be exponentially better than ChatGPT 4. And if they don't know, I guess, how it does what it does, is that part of the concern? Is that what's pushing this? Even people like Musk and so on, who are talking about having a pause on AI development. Is this part of the concern, that we just don't know what's happening inside the machine, especially since there is no there, right? There is no there's no being as such, as much as I even catch myself thanking ChatGPT 4 for
I know you do that, don't you?
There's an intuitive
human.
Yeah, it's a really and I chuckle at myself, and it responds, "You're welcome." So, even though I know there is no there, right? I'm talking to a large language model that is using data, as you described, to give me something that's human-like, but is not human.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, so what a great question, Mads. Yeah, let's begin with where we are right now, and then let's talk about exponential growth. So I think it's important to say that these models currently are much better at seeming like they are intelligent human than actually being so. So, I mean, the best way of understanding them is like they're sophisticated autocomplete. They are unbelievably good at sounding human-like because they have swallowed up basically everything we've ever produced, and they've kind of learned, just through this kind of raw statistical inference that when you say thanks very much, normally the response is that's fine, no problem, you're welcome. But like so when you chat to it feels so human that I think it's very easy for people to begin to think that there is some kind of sentience surely lurking somewhere in that model, peering back at you, and there really, really is not. Like there really isn't yet.
But
then we get onto exponential growth, and I think yes, like exponentials work in very, very different ways to linear development, and I think for the concern I hear from engineers is really about that exponential development, and the kind of what it really means is that it's becoming very hard for us to be confident about even the kind of midterm future we might be in. Our horizons are drawing back, if you will, especially as this collides with like a series of other like mega trends, like quantum computing, and I mean it's not the only huge technical thing currently happening, but there's a series of these things that are kind of bouncing off each other, and that means that like what our kind of world and these models look like, well, the next generation of models in 6 months or a year or 2 years is becoming very mysterious and very, very hard to know what things are going to look like in, say, 5 years' time.
Hey there, sorry to interrupt, but if you're finding this conversation as fascinating as I am, you won't want to miss the second half of the chat, available exclusively to our subscribers. In the second half, Carl dives into some of the darker ethical concerns surrounding AI, including its potential for social harm in polarized societies. We also discuss a real-world case study involving deepfake technology. And if you're looking for a glimmer of hope, Carl also shares some truly inspiring stories from India where AI is being used to empower the marginalized and bridge the digital divide. So if you're not a subscriber yet, now's the perfect time to join us. Click the link at the top of the show notes to gain access to the full episode and unlock a wealth of insights into the future of AI ethics and governance. Okay, back to Carl now.
And so I think the concern there is really, and this is the other big power dynamic, probably the most important power dynamic of all, is the relationship between AI and governments and governance. So around the rules that we set for it, how it should be developed, how it should be used, how it should behave. And I think the real concern is like, can we do the squishy human art of consensus forming and institution building and basically trying to find like ways of beginning to kind of create kind of democratic and genuinely credible signals and rules to suddenly start shaping this. I think the concern is that on the one hand, you've got a kind of exponential growth curve in the power of the technology, and therefore its potential to both do great good and great harm. We're never going to exponentially become faster at building consensus around AI governance. And well, we're
going to human it.
Yeah, that's always been, that's always been something which isn't even linear. We go back, we go forward. Politics doesn't work like tech, and I think that's the concern. That's actually another project I'm currently doing is to try and build new ways of creating democratic signals for AI governance, and try to do that in ways which are as broad-based and diversely sourced and as fast as we can.
Right. That's if I understand correctly, that's the Recursive Republic project.
Recursive Public, yeah. So it's an open AI funded project, and the idea there is to basically try. Well, there's 10 different teams around the world, and everyone's pursuing their own idea about how to basically source democratic signals for AI governance, especially by using AI. So almost all the teams are using different forms of artificial intelligence themselves to try and create these signals. And the idea is to try and create something as kind of rapidly developing as we possibly can, and then begin to actually practically use that, hopefully, to begin to guide the development of AI models, whether that's OpenAI's or others.
So how do you mean? Maybe develop that a little bit more, because if I understand correctly, it was also it's a consensus building, or the intent is to build consensus using AI to, I guess, promote areas of common ground, as opposed to what we've come to know of social media, i.e., promote the points of difference. In other words, growing our division and pushing us back into our kind of our echo chambers. So I think this is, if I understand, is the reverse of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. Exactly.
Well, I read your work. That's why.
Yeah. I am a super fan of the Digital Democrats in Taiwan, Taiwan. I think they're the most accomplished, most successful digital democrats in the world. I went over there to do a short documentary with the BBC a couple of years ago, and I've kind of they've basically built a kind of way of using kind of partly like mixed reality processes, including digital debates, to actually draft regulation and law. And I don't think anywhere else in the world has really managed to do that. So for this project, I teamed up with Chatham House and Taiwan, the Taiwan community. So it's a large kind of hacker community in Taiwan. And the idea has been, and is now, happening right now, to create a consensus-seeking online deliberation to set the agenda for AI governance that we'll then pursue going forwards. It's happening on a platform called Polis. That's what they use in Taiwan as well. Colin, one of the founders of Polis, is part of the kind of coalition of the willing that we put together for the project. And Polis is really, really interesting, exactly for the reason that you said. What it does is you log onto this platform, it asks you questions, you start drafting answers, you start drafting your own proposals. So far, so social media. But it draws up a kind of conversation space, so people that agree tend to be similar, people that disagree tend to be further apart, and drawing that space up, you can kind of see different tribes that might be quite polarized, and it then starts making proposals more visible that get agreement spanning different important divisions within the debate.
That's so
and that kind of gamifies consensus. So what it does is in Taiwan, we've seen this happen time and time again. You begin with debates which are on Uber or on online sales of alcohol or on e-scooters. They can begin with two different groups, quite entrenched, disagreeing with each other, and on social media, all that disagreement is the stuff that you see. And here, it submerges all of that, and it allows unseen consensus to float up instead. And it reveals, I think, like a reality, which is that actually, even on most topics with which we disagree with each other, we actually will tend to agree on quite a lot as well, usually more. But that's all kind of normally eclipsed. So it's just kind of excavating hidden commonalities that human beings have often. Like Uber, everyone was basically concerned with rider safety and with driver safety. And when that was sorted out, actually regulation could work pretty well. And so that's our hope here. So is to kind of bring, what we've been trying to do is to bring in all the different tribes in debates around AI governance, the boosters and the gloomers and the tech bros and the AI governance think tank wonks and everyone else, bring them all into this Polis environment. Young people as well, hundreds and hundreds of young people we've inducted into it too. Obviously AI engineers as well. And then we've been running this kind of debate for about a month now. where we're trying to find consensus items. And the next step, hopefully, is we'll then start posing to that community specific questions which OpenAI themselves set.
That's. I've logged on to Polis, and I've joined the research since you shared about it on LinkedIn, and it's incredible because it's rather easy and intuitive because the answers are very quick: yes, no, do you agree or disagree or don't know? And there's if I understood correctly, there's certainly more than 100 questions because it kind of keeps going, and then it just charts you ever so gradually into a tribe, as you said, which is I think is also from a kind of user interface is actually quite interesting because it then helps you identify perhaps more clearly on a bigger chart that you really are part of a tribe, that there are certain biases, certain values, life orientation, personal history, etc., that is setting you towards a particular view on this particular issue. And I think that in itself, that reflective piece or self-reflective piece is also, in my view at least, was actually quite interesting to see, and as I kept on answering more and more questions, I could see how I kind of moved ever so slightly kind of more towards the center of a particular tribe. I think that's a really, really useful tool, and I'd be actually keen to see then how that then unfolds into building this, I guess, kind of consensus, because in many ways it does sound a little bit too good to be true, because what we're doing, what it seems to me like we're doing, is we're flipping very much that idea of power, right? Where in traditional social media, the power is in division and in anger and in getting eyeballs on a device. Because we're drawn to that. That's and I think you talked about this last time. It's part of our evolutionary byproducts to be drawn to drama and danger and anger, whereas here the power is flipped very differently to finding consensus. I just wonder, are we drawn as much to that? Have you got any kind of sense of whether people are getting as engaged or as interested, or are all of these people, I guess, already interested? A selective group of people who are already interested in this problem and trying to solve it, and can we get, can we talk about on this about really, really hot topics or really, really polarizing topics like the US election or QAnon or the vaccines, COVID vaccine, etc., etc. Have you got any thoughts on that? I know it's early stages, but any thoughts on that so far?
Yeah, I mean, great questions, Maz. I think people. Firstly, I think people actually quite like being in a space which is less angry and less hostile, and where it feels like we're more part of like team humanity, trying to come up with a kind of
there's a warm and fuzzy, yeah.
So like and people, I think, have with nothing other than goodwill have joined. I mean, we've had across the deliberations we've run, and there's one in Taiwan happening at the same time, and that's going to be an interesting comparison. Right. We've had, over 1,000 people and tens of thousands of votes, and that's on a pretty small kind of project team, just trying to bootstrap this kind of initial kind of pilot as we go, because I think people genuinely care about the answers that this creates and can see how it will affect their lives. I think to me the really big unanswered question is not finding consensus. I think already I can see in the debates. I mean, it's not polarized tribally, but definitely we can see quadrants. We can see some people more optimistic, pessimistic. There's definitely different emphases happening, but I can already see tons of consensus coming out of this discussion. I mean, people kind of regardless, like I think there's one statement which is the goal of AI is to build a super intelligence, which is extremely divisive. Everything else actually is like broadly consensual. And there's dozens of hyper-consensual statements that basically everyone agrees with coming out. So I've got no doubt that consensus can be identified. And I think the big unanswered question is, can we connect this into power to actually make it meaningful, as in it actually does stuff?
As in turn into policy in government. Yeah.
In government, in the tech companies themselves, in the decisions that developers might make, in the things that think tanks might raise, and that's what we're kind of like really trying to work hard on and scratch our heads about now, is how do we repay the time and investment that people will put into this kind of process, and that we're asking people to continue to do so. And by the way, anyone listening to this, get involved. Google Recursive Public and jump in.
I'll share the link for it, of course. Absolutely,
Yeah,
I'll be sharing the link for, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
How do we actually turn that into like a meaningful outcome? So, an AI company actually making a decision to do X rather than Y, or a government deciding to look at A rather than B, or a rule or law being passed, or and that's what's actually just the bigger problem that no one's really solved is just like, how does AI governance actually work? Like, where does it sit? Like, institutionally, what does it look like? Like, is it ultimately to do with nation state regulation and law? But it might be something else. And that's just, China's taken one approach to AI regulation, Europe's taken another, America's taken a third, the UK is convening a summit because we don't know what to do. I mean, it's these are questions bigger than my project. Obviously, this is one of the kind of global questions that we're trying to solve at the moment. But that's also a really important part of this project, because if it's just a talking shop, then it won't matter to people. And if it doesn't matter to people, they won't do it. But if we can connect democratic signals into just something, a decision which matters, then I think we'll see this process continue to evolve. And the idea of the recursive public, by the way, just in case there are people that are kind of slightly confused about the name, is a public which kind of continues to form and to live and to kind of debate and to answer questions. So we want this to be something which doesn't go away. It's like actually we want it to grow as a community of people that all walks of life, anyone who care about AI governance and want to be part of debates about it. And then that's something which we'll then kind of curate and use. So we'll start asking, say, live questions which, say, AI engineers are currently thinking about, and try and use that public to respond to those. And obviously use the agenda setting statements, because that's what they're currently doing, to try and drive the questions and thinking which happens within the companies at the same time. So that's the whole idea. Whether it can solve QAnon, probably not. Like I think when disagreement becomes actually the point, when discord really becomes like the identity that people have, then it's kind of, then you don't have people need to enter into a consensus-seeking debate actually wanting to try and find consensus.
You need to exactly. You need to want to see the other person, as opposed to just hate them and embrace your narrative. And as you said, your identity. I think that's important. Yeah, exactly. And zero sum contests are not going to be the sort of thing that I think we will be able to navigate through by trying to get people to kind of respect.
If you'd like to hear the rest of this episode and gain access to all of the episodes of The Voices of War, simply become a subscriber using the link in the show notes. As you know, I will not feature any ads on the show, which is made possible solely through the support of our subscribers. If you find value in the content, you can become one now.